Hi, I'm Josh McGrath. I'm Andrew Haas. Hi, I'm Josh McGrath.
I'm Andrew Haas.
And this is the Ardent Pursuit Podcast. Today we are going to examine the misplaced priorities that people oftentimes have when it comes to what they should value when it comes to a romantic relationship. We're going to do this by actually starting by looking at historical, values that people had when pursuing marriage. Because believe it or not, where we once were as a nation and where we were as a culture is very different than where we are today when it comes to romantic relationships. Now, Andrew, today we have a lot to cover. We're going to try to be as succinct as possible. But I want to kind of start back from, a historical perspective. Men, when they were pursuing a romantic, interest, it was for the purpose of marriage. And what they would bring to the table is essentially their ability to provide and their ability to protect. And what they were looking for was a woman who wanted to be a wife, who wanted to be a mother, who wanted to join with them in creating a family legacy. And for women, more historically, what they brought to the table was their ability to be a wife, their ability to be a mother. And what they were looking for was a provider, a protector, and then opportunity that marriage would bring them. So maybe moving to a different city or state or country, travel opportunities, wealth, increase in social status and whatnot.
And something that we want men to recognize, and women, is that throughout history, there were certain roles, there were certain duties, there were certain expectations that each person had, and it made everything work. So we're not advocating that we need to culturally go back 400 years.
Sure.
We're just saying, hey, look at how things functioned then, look at some of the patterns that existed, and what can we bring current day? What can we learn? What can we do today? What did they do well then? What's not working today? And what we want to unpack is this idea that there are certain roles, certain responsibilities that men and women each have that might not overlap.
You mentioned the word duty. There's something that, we don't think about a lot in our culture, and particularly not in the context of romantic relationships or marriage. But that was a fundamental understanding that people had when it came to romantic pursuits. Historically, women weren't signing on to marriage for the sake of an easier life. They were signing on recognizing that they were buying into a man's vision and a man's mission that was going to require them to work hard. It was going to require them to be creative and resourceful. It was going to require them to shoulder difficult things and responsibilities that, today, I wouldn't be able to probably shoulder. And it was out of the sense of duty, the responsibility that I have in the role that I fulfill as a man or as a woman, that enabled culture to expand and thrive for all of human history.
So we can look at some early examples like the settlers that came over here. On the Mayflower, life was very challenging. About half the crew died the first year. All that to say, it was a very challenging time where people had to walk in their capabilities, walk in their unique roles to make life work.
Difficulty actually clarifies the roles and responsibilities of women and men. And this wasn't a social construct. It wasn't a way of men trying to put women down or women trying to usurp men. It was a recognition that if we were going to survive, men had to do what they were able to do, what they were good at, what they were capable of doing, and women had to do something that was different that they were good at, that they were capable of doing.
And another example of this would be the Oregon Trail. You can look back to that period in time. It was unique. It was very challenging.
Yeah.
And to make it all work, men and women had to take on unique, specific roles for life to actually continue. Men fulfilled certain duties, men had certain responsibilities, women had certain duties, they had certain responsibilities, and together it actually made life work and made that to be a very notable moment in time.
It's true. Part of the way we were even able to, conquer the West, was that couples went together, families went together out West and endured some really difficult times and shouldered really unique responsibilities. I actually want to read a passage here from a woman named Catherine Pringle in her book Across the Plains in 1844. This is an excerpt where she's recalling her childhood journey on the Oregon Trail at age 14. She writes this: "We started from Missouri with 2 wagons in a large tent, Father driving one team and Henry the other, while Mother cared for us children. The road was rough, and at times we had to double teams to pull the wagons over steep places. Then came the awful day when Father was taken sick with camp fever. He lingered a few days, then died, and was buried by the roadside in a rude coffin made from our wagon boards. Mother was left with 7 children, the youngest a babe of 6 months. We struggled on, but soon after, Henry struck his leg with an axe while chopping wood, and blood poisoning set in. He too died, leaving us with 1 wagon and no man to guide us." I mean, that just, wow. I can't even imagine. Here is a single mother now with 6 children, a child 6 months old, without a husband, without an eldest son. We don't know where they are, probably somewhere in the middle of the wilderness. And she has to carry on. And one of the things that, just is amazing to me is the grit, the tenacity, the determination, the duty that these women and men had. The father had a duty and responsibility to provide and protect for his wife and his family. And when he died, that duty and responsibility moved to the eldest son, Henry.
Yeah.
And then he died, and it moves to the mother. And so again, there's not a competition here to say which role and responsibility is more important,
right,
which role and responsibility is better, which role and responsibility is more valuable. It all's valuable. It's all needed. And it's all driven from a place of duty, understanding that I have a responsibility that's bigger than just my own wants, needs, and desires.
And when the need arose, the wife there had to step into certain responsibilities, had to take on certain things that otherwise her husband probably would have taken care of. So this isn't about, segregating roles, responsibilities, all that. It's to say, we are naturally better at certain things as men. Women are naturally better at certain things, but in challenging times, there will be overlap.
And so much of our culture today is so fixated on this idea of gender roles and the fact that, gender roles are a construct of society, and it's almost become a taboo discussion to recognize that women and men not only are different, but are actually gifted in different areas, and that we don't need to do the same thing, and we're not called to the same thing.
And, just to go back to the Oregon Trail example, there was a point in time where this stuff didn't even have to be decided. Life dictated that there were certain things that men did because they needed to be done. There were certain things that women did because they needed to be done, and that enabled life to move forward. We're at a place now where we actually have the blessing and the benefit where a lot of those challenges and struggles don't exist, but it has allowed a lot of these what would otherwise be some natural clarity that would otherwise be there is no longer there. And we find ourselves, men and women find themselves trying to figure out, what is my role? What is my responsibility? What duties do I have? And it's just led to a lot of confusion.
It is the blessing and benefit of a modern Western society that has enabled people with the luxury to sit around and to question, to debate, and then to reject gender roles and responsibilities. It doesn't mean that everything historically that was associated with masculinity or femininity is something that needs to be walked out today. But I will tell you right now, it is the sacrifice of so many people that enable people to sit around today and to disparage gender roles, to disparage marriage, to disparage that women and men have unique giftings, callings, and duties.
With the blessing that modern life has afforded us, there is a shadow side. And that goes for a lot of things. You have a bigger income, a bigger paycheck, you have more money to manage, there are new challenges presented. If you have an easier way of life, if we have modern conveniences, those are all great. It just means there are new challenges to manage.
Sure.
And what we're seeing in culture, there are, as we're here talking about it, there are a lot of problems that are out there. Some of them coming from this idea that we've sort of lost some clarity and we've lost some definition around what is a guy supposed to do, broadly speaking? What are women supposed to do, broadly speaking?
And because of how dysfunctional we are as a society today, the pendulum swings, right, from extreme to extreme. And so there was a time and an era where, women operated in very classical female roles, men operated in very classical male roles. And today, what we've done is we've decided, well, women can operate in any role, and the masculinity of men is something that we need to put down. We discussed that early on in the show. What we've done is we are trying to demasculinize men by and large. Masculinity, I'm going to say, is fairly simple in its understanding of the world. Meaning, when you ask probably 9 out of 10 men today what they think the role and responsibility of a man is in a marriage, you're probably going to get some version of to provide and to protect. Now, their view on children, family, legacy, that might be very different than days gone by. But by and large, masculinity is driven to provide and to protect. And if it's not that, it's going to be the flip side, which is, to destroy.
Yeah.
And so we live in a time where men are still oftentimes driven by this desire to provide and protect, but it's in an era that is not receptive of a man who wants to do that.
And with financial independence and a safer society, women no longer need to prioritize those things, which is okay, but there is still that masculine drive, that masculine identity where those things exist. And so culture has tried to say those aspects of men are no longer needed because look, women are safer, they don't necessarily need that. And so it's really like convoluted the whole thing where men, part of their skill set is being downplayed or ignored or saying it's not even needed. Women are often saying we don't need it. And it's really muddied the waters as men and women try to figure out, okay, what do I bring to the table? Guys are more confused these days. They're not really sure, if not this, what do I bring? And so they've got to figure that out. And women are saying, well, I don't really need that anymore. So what do I need? And it's just led us to the mess we're in.
Yeah, women by and large aren't looking for a provider and protector. And so that leaves men wondering, well, historically, that's what I brought to the table. Historically, that's like the masculine responsibility. So like you said, what am I bringing to the table? And then you've got women who are prioritizing, external qualities as something that they're valuing. So that's the classic, is he 6 feet tall? Does he make $100,000 or more? How in shape is he? What kind of car does he drive? Things that really don't tell you whether or not he will be a good husband, a faithful partner, a good father, anything like that. And today, a lot of women actually are looking for what we'll call a soft man. Not a classic masculine man. They're looking for someone that mirrors more of their emotion, mirrors more of their desires, mirrors more of their personality. And that classic masculine trait of protect and provide is really downplayed in society and is even, I think to some extent, almost made fun of by women, because how often do we hear women say, oh, I don't need no man to provide for me. I don't need no man to protect me. And it's like, well, okay, but like, if you don't want a man providing or protecting you, then you don't really want a man. What you're looking for is a male version of you. And that is uninteresting to most men. And believe it or not, that's uninteresting to most women. They just don't realize it.
And there's this ongoing continual blurring of the lines in culture where as we advance, as we progress, there seems to be this incessant drive to blur what men and women can do, should do, what we're good at. Categorically, we're pretty much trying to say women and men are the same thing.
Yeah.
Really no difference other than possibly some physical attributes. And that has led to some very real problems.
The modern culture very much advocates for, you do you, freedom, personal choice. And what that's led to is a world where so many women and men believe that they don't have a duty to perform with regards to their role within a romantic relationship or within a marriage. And what's funny is a lot of the, dysfunction that exists, especially in romantic relationships in our culture, come from a lack of understanding what my role and responsibility is as the woman or as the man. Now, again, we're not advocating for, women wash dishes and men don't. No, that's not what we're advocating for. We're talking about, high level roles and responsibilities. We're talking about high level, ideas of duty and honor. We're not going to spell all those out here. That's something that we're going to let our listeners figure out, wrestle with. They can talk to their authority and accountability to figure it out. But what we are identifying and that we are going to, be clear about is men and women are different. In romantic relationships and in marriage, there are different roles and responsibilities. We have different duties. And that's not bad. That's not negative. That's not awful. And men should not shrink or shy away from leaning into their masculine nature to be led by duty and honor just because we live in a culture where it's attacked and vilified and looked down upon.
We have culturally given up on pretty much all of those ideas. And somehow the focus became pretty much only about what am I interested in, what fulfills me, what makes me happy, what do I want to do, I, me. And I think men specifically have really lost this idea of what is my responsibility to my peers, to my community, to my family, to my wife, to my church. Pick your sphere of where you operate. And, men need to rediscover or re-implement this idea of I have responsibilities, I have a duty to certain things, and what are they?
Yeah.
We have to figure that out.
Now, for men who really want to lean into being a man here in 2025, it's important for them to be okay with being dangerous towards the right things.
The right things.
Masculinity inherently is dangerous. And if unchecked, it's dangerous to women, to children, to, nations. History shows that. But masculinity, when being dangerous to the right things, is really good. So a man who is, willing to step in and defend a woman's honor against an inappropriate man or an aggressive man, that is good. A man who steps in and protects a woman from, a charging dog, that is a good thing. A man who steps in when a woman's broken down on the side of the road and stranded at night, that is a good thing. Men need to utilize their masculinity to protect and to provide.
Far too many women have been hurt and damaged by men using their strength inappropriately.
Yes, unfortunately.
Men in their selfishness too often use their strength, use their masculine drive in ways that are harmful toward women. And women have largely responded at times with a total disinterest. And we see that culturally.
Men need to be comfortable leaning into their role as a man, as a masculine man, but make sure that that role is, checked, that there's a check and balance to it. Because like you said, it's so easy for that to become, unsafe, to use a popular word today, toxic. Now, unfortunately, our culture today defines essentially masculinity in its existence as toxic. But masculinity that is unchecked, that is not surrendered to the Lord, that is not being leveraged for the benefit and protection of others, that can be toxic.
And you go to any culture in any part of the world, and you're going to find men who hurt and abuse women. And so in one sense, you could say, well, yeah, of course, look at how often, how frequently men hurt and abuse women. Clearly, masculinity is toxic. And no, it's not the masculinity that's harmful and toxic. It's when men misuse that and use it for selfish purposes. A guy's strength used toward the right thing is actually incredibly beneficial.
And men need to know what they bring to the table when it comes to dating in 2025, because no longer are the values and abilities of provider and protector the sole thing that is going to win you the affection of a woman, at least for most women. You as a man need to come to the table and be able to identify that, hey, I'm also resourceful. I'm also creative. I've got grit. I've got determination. I'm reliable. I'm dependable. I'm responsible. It's those qualities that you as the man need to know that you possess and that you have, because that will set you apart when you're at the, quote unquote, negotiating table of love, because you're able to say, hey, here's what I'm bringing to this relationship. And all too often, men and women don't know what they're bringing to the relationship. The assumption by the woman is, I'll be available, sexually to you. That's what I'm bringing. And the man is like, well, what do you want me to bring to the table? And that's what I'll be. We've got to reclaim men understanding what their value is, what character qualities do they possess, and how they're going to walk those out in providing and protecting a woman.
And that's something that has arguably become harder for men in today's
for sure
in today's culture.
Yeah.
But no less important. And it doesn't mean that a guy doesn't figure it out. He's got to put in the time, put in the effort to figure that out. Whereas historically, maybe some of these roles, some of these responsibilities were more naturally defined. That was great. You kind of did what you had to do.
Yep.
She did what she had to do, and it worked. Now we have certain luxuries where some of those things aren't as clearly defined, but a guy really has to know what these things are, and he's got to put in the time. And it's harder, but who cares?
And we want to make sure that we are equipping men to navigate romantic relationships in a way that will lead towards flourishing marriages. And I think one of the things that's really important for men to understand is, what am I looking for in a relationship? What should I be valuing? When we talk about duty and honor, what does that mean when it comes to the type of woman I want to pursue?
And one way to look at this would be in a traditional business sense, where you have a CEO, you might have a COO. Companies have organization and structure for a reason. It's generally proven to work. And relationships, in some ways, are no different. I mean, there are some differences, but there are some overlaps.
Yep.
And one way to look at this would be, as a guy, if you're the CEO, you're going to want a very competent COO to help run the organization, which is the family. And vice versa, as a COO, and you're going to go work for a company, you're going to want to know who the CEO is, what's his track record. And so you can, there are some overlaps where you can use some of that wisdom and that understanding to realize, oh, this is a big deal. And these are big roles. These are weighty roles. This isn't just something to take lightly.
It's true. You're not going to hire for a COO position the prettiest applicant. You're hopefully going to hire the most qualified because, let's say you're the CEO founder, you recognize that the role of a CEO is instrumental in the success of your business and therefore your life. And while, marriages, romantic relationships, they are different than a business context, but there's some great overlap there. I know that over the years, when I've talked to men as they're preparing to get married, I talk about this idea of CEO, COO roles, and the fact that your job as a man is to cast vision for the COO to execute. And that there is a partnership there where you're walking in this together, that your decisions as CEO matter because they affect the COO. And guess what? The COO's decisions matter because it affects the CEO. We understand that in a business context. That's not controversial. But for some reason, while being able to distinguish the different roles and responsibilities, giftings and talents within a business context, within a relationship context, within a marriage, we're like, oh no, you're one and the same. You both have the same role, you have the same responsibilities, you have the same perspectives, everything's split 50-50. And the problem with that is that's not how men and women are created. That breaks down the unique tension that is created between the feminine and the masculine that ultimately holds marriages, families, and society together.
Fundamentally, organizations just weren't meant to function that way, even down to a marriage and a family. And yeah, as you said, we understand it in a broader context, but for some reason, when it comes to this, we just push back so strong. And something else that men need to keep at the forefront as they figure out what they're looking for is this distinction between need and desire. Desire is an easy one because you have certain desires, certain tendencies, certain preferences, and that's an easy one to figure out. What most men struggle with is figuring out what they need.
Yeah.
Or arguably more importantly, what they will need.
Yes.
And that can be very hard to determine, especially if it's years down the road. But hey, go talk to married guys, go talk to, you can find this out. This isn't hard to determine in a general sense. With a little bit of effort, go talk to some people, go talk to some older guys. There's lots of good content out there. But for a guy to figure out what do I need and what do I desire?
Historically, that was fairly well defined for men from the get-go. You were looking for, your desire and need, were fairly similar. I desire/need a wife. I desire/need a woman who can be a mother. And I desire/society needs a family, children, posterity. And so it was easier to go out as a man and know this is, it became a little maybe more pragmatic. I need this. And sure, maybe some of the, rainbows and butterflies were absent from romantic relationships because they were a little more pragmatic. But what was great about that time was that men at least knew what they were looking for. It was self-defined, really, because of the time and era that they lived in. Whereas today, you're absolutely right. So many men are uncertain what they need. And part of the way you're going to determine what you need is based upon the vision that you have for your life. Hopefully, the vision for your life is bigger than you. Hopefully, the vision for your life does include, marriage, family, children, a future. But if it doesn't, you may need something different. If your vision for your life is just travel the world and go hiking, don't marry the introvert who likes to stay home. You're going to need a woman who likes to travel and go hiking. And so, again, you're going, based upon the vision that you have for your life, that will dictate the needs that you have, which then will determine the type of woman that you're interested in, which will then inform what you should be attracted to.
And men need to learn to distinguish between what a need might be and what, say, their strengths are, or what her strengths might be. And there's this natural tendency to pursue or prioritize similar strengths. And that's not a problem in and of itself. The problem arises when that becomes the thing that you think determines success in a relationship. If you love to cook and she loves to cook, you think, okay, it's gonna work out.
Yeah.
Or you're a lawyer and she's a lawyer. It's like, yep, we're made for each other. And it's like, well, no, you have similar strengths, but that actually doesn't bear any weight towards the success of the relationship.
It's true. From a Christian perspective, one of the things I say quite frequently when it comes to romantic relationships is I don't know what will work because so many crazy combinations work. But I know what won't work. And one thing that won't work in a Christian context is if both people don't love Jesus more than the other person. If both people don't love Jesus more so than their desire for romance or relationships or marriage. What won't work is if your life as a believer is not surrendered and submitted to the lordship of Christ. Because no relationship can survive a selfish, self-centered, sinful person at the helm of it. The only reason a relationship can last is because of Jesus.
Is that not indicative of how this all started, back in the Garden of Eden with, Adam and Eve? They were told, do whatever you want, just don't do this one thing, which is interesting. That didn't even work out.
One thing, that was it.
But to your point, there are a lot of things you can do.
Yeah.
And it's pretty wide open as far as guys, the opportunities are plentiful in front of you. There are a few things though to watch out for. And that's what you're saying.
Discernment is going to be key in this entire process. One of the things that we have talked about several times, probably more off air than we have actually on the show, is this idea that people oftentimes have misplaced value on certain things that they're attracted to. So you alluded to it earlier, they're really attracted to a particular strength because that is a similar strength they have. And it's like, sure, cool, that's awesome. But is that really the thing of value, of attraction that needs to be there for you in order for this relationship to work? So many people are asking the question, where are all the good men? Where are all the good women? We tackled that concept a few episodes ago. And it is so important for men to be able to discern what are the qualities, what are the characteristics, what are the needs that I have that I'm looking for in a woman who will complement who I am and where I'm going. And that does take discernment, because if you don't have discernment, that either through the power of the Holy Spirit or through the voice of, authority and accountability, you will naturally end up selecting someone that fulfills your selfish desires, but doesn't actually help you move towards a vision that's bigger than yourself.
And as a guy is processing his interest in somebody, in a woman, it is good for him to be considering, both for himself and for her, what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses, men to be aware of what those are, have words and clarity around that, and for her as well, learn what her strengths are, learn what her weaknesses are, and just see if there's any natural alignment. Now, there doesn't necessarily need to be natural alignment in those things. It certainly can be helpful.
Yeah.
But either way, it's really good practice for a guy to put his mind toward those things. Because if she's doing the things she should be doing, she's going to be doing the same thing toward you.
Yeah, strengths and weaknesses don't have to, line up.
Right.
And going back to our business analogy, as a CEO, hopefully you're not hiring a COO who's a mini you. Because if you're hiring someone who has the same exact strengths and weaknesses you do, now you just end up with a blind spot and you're not taking any more ground, because it's like, well, we have the same strength. What you're doing is you're actually looking for someone who will complement your strengths, someone who will complement your weaknesses, someone who can step in where you can't. And in the same way, when it comes to a romantic pursuit and ultimately marriage, sure, strengths and weaknesses can align, but they don't need to.
Right.
And men should be looking for women in their lives who can complement their strengths and weaknesses, and vice versa, because it's that, that Proverbs, idea of iron sharpens iron, so one man's countenance does another. It's that within the covenant of marriage that's going to produce a beautiful, sharp instrument that can be used for the kingdom.
And men walking in unique roles, certain responsibilities that could be mostly distinct from her roles and her responsibilities, that isn't inherently a bad thing or something to find problematic. It won't always be that life has roles very distinct, but culturally, we've gotten to a point where we've actually started from that point of view. If they are different, they're problematic. And we are going back to a place where we're saying, hold on, let's revisit that whole premise. And having different roles, different responsibilities, different duties can actually be a really helpful thing.
It's so true. So gentlemen, 2 things we want you to do this week. Number 1, you need to identify what are you bringing to the table. This is important. Yes, hopefully you're bringing being a provider and being a protector, but there's more to you than that. You need to know what that is. If you need help, turn to other men, turn to authority and accountability. Ask them to help clarify what are some of the other attributes and characteristics that they see in you. Second thing is you need to bring clarity to know the difference between what you desire versus what you need. We all desire many things. And when you're thinking about a romantic pursuit, it's kind of sky's the limit daydreaming. But the reality is you need to know before even beginning that relationship, what do I need in a woman? And the way to determine that is to know what is your vision. If you need help with that, go back and listen to one of our early episodes about vision. Invite authority and accountability into the process, and together you'll build a craft of vision that will help inform the type of woman you should be pursuing. As always, we love having you here on the Art and Pursuit podcast. We look forward to having you here next time.